Greetings, my excellent friend.
Welcome to Most Excellent Adventure
to Heavy Metal
History.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the Heavy Metal History Podcast, my guest for this week doesn't need an introduction, but what the hell, let's give him one anyways. He is the vocalist for the band Converge. He is one half of the guy that brought you Death Wish Inc. Records. Last year he put out Wear Your Wounds. Right now he is working, or it's done, I guess. We're going to be talking about his new band, Umbra Vitae. Jacob Bannon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I am
here.
Yeah,
absolutely, man. So this is another new band for you. You've put out 2 records within the past couple of years. Where did this one start? Because I know you've worked with Mike McKenzie on this and Wear Your Wounds now, so you and Sean Martin. So I guess you have like a nice little collective kind of growing with these guys that you've known for years now, I assume.
Yeah, for sure. I think you talked to Mike about it a little bit at some point.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. So initially it started as an idea when we were just in the room together rehearsing some of the new Wear Your Wounds songs that ended up becoming the Rust on the Gates of Heaven album. Mm-hmm. And when typically, do you play in a band or play music at all?
Yeah, I play guitar.
All right, cool. So you can know how that goes. You start, you get there with a goal in mind, and you almost never get started on it for, seemingly minutes or hours, and you kind of get sidetracked. And some of our sidetracked riffing that would happen would be, Mike and Sean kind of ripping through some more metallic ideas and riffs to kind of warm up, and we would hang out and talk about them and play them. And after doing that a handful of times, we realized that this stuff had teeth and had substance and wasn't really like anything else that we were doing, and certainly didn't fit within the sort of sonic character of that band. But since we were all rooted in that world, it's kind of like a no-brainer, but like we should do something with this. And soon after that, we went on before that, we went on tour with Mike's project Stomach Earth, and mm-hmm. Greg from the Red Chord, who we've all obviously known for a while, came with him to be the second person on stage on that run. And we started talking about it with him, and he was like, I'd play in it. I'd definitely be into it. And so he basically joined up at that point casually. And then, we went back and forth a bit with drummers for the project. Initially, our pal Chris Maggio, who plays in Wear Your Wounds with us, who was in Trap Them and is now playing with High on Fire and stuff. He was going to play at one point, and his schedule just got so crazy and just wasn't matching up with ours. And Mike suggested at that point, he's like, I always wanted to do a proper band with John, who played with the Red Chord on a tour, and people know him now from being in Uncle Acid and Deadbeats, but he's also filled in for Behemoth. He filled in for Graveyard the other month on like a couple days notice.
Oh, wow.
He filled in for 1349. He's just a monster drummer. A lot of people also know him obviously from Job for a Cowboy.
Yeah. And
he's just, one of those kind of drumming talents that when he plays, it's clearly not effortless, but he makes these incredibly complicated things look quite easy. And, we said, hey, let's reach out to him to see if he'll be available. And he was, and the band was born at that point.
Nice. That's like a great series of coincidences almost to have, where like, you have all these songs that you're kind of like sort of working on, and you're like, well, how do we make it like a full thing here? Because you see like the promise and everything.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
To be able to know all these people to bring it together like that is it's such a great thing to have all those people available to you.
And one thing too, I should say is that, years ago, Sean and I, right after he left Hatebreed, we started talking about doing a heavy band at that point. Mm-hmm. And he even came up and spent a weekend with me, and we talked about it and riffed on some ideas. But we didn't really go any further with it than that. It was just sort of in the sort of primordial state, and our lives took a million creative turns.
Yeah.
We did a whole bunch of other stuff, but it was always something that we wanted to do. So that's why he also seemed like a perfect fit for me to be guitar number 2.
So most of this material was kind of written during the same time that the Where Your Wound stuff was going on?
Some of the basic ideas, but we focused on those on that material, on the Where Your Wounds material in that album, because it took a ton of effort on all of our ends, and once we were kind of through that process, we had some time, and you need some time to reset your creative mind a little bit. Mm-hmm. We all recorded a bunch of other stuff with our other bands, and we just sort of scratched out some time to start refining some of these ideas. So Mike started sending over a bunch of riff ideas. I threw a bunch in the pot. Greg threw a bunch in the pot, and Sean threw a bunch in the pot. And then we started sort of shaping them and made the album. It was pretty straightforward. It wasn't like we're not, even though people might think that because we've all been in bands for a long time that we have, I guess, like, limitless budgets or ideas of how we could create stuff. But we got to do stuff on the cheap and fast. And we did this whole the recording process was done at God City, and the drums were done in basically a day and a half. Wow. And mixing took about a day, and vocals took a day, and the rest of the other stuff, all the guitar tracking Mike did on his own. He put some of that actually on his Twitch channel when he was working on it initially. Mm-hmm. So like we were all just kind of working satellite just to kind of put it together as fast as possible and keep it as fresh as possible to us.
Yeah, that's one of those things that kind of when you're working on it and you're on that limited budget, you kind of get this, like, I don't want to say better product out of it, but it's almost like you're realizing the limitations that you have in front of you, and you're still like working to the best of your ability to like make it sound like you're not working against those limitations, if that makes sense. For sure.
And one of the issues with all of us being able to sort of self-record in a variety of capacities now is like you can sit there and over sharpen something. It's like whittling a piece of wood, like and you're just kind of like carving at it, and eventually there's nothing left but a giant pile of stuff. And sometimes the less is more. And so with this record, we just wanted to get it out of us as quickly as possible, and move on to the next thing. And that the same went for me in terms of lyrical writing and like vocal phrasing and things like that. That process I tried to move through pretty quickly and be just hyper focused on this. Like when I'm working on anything, whether it be visuals or music, I try to only immerse myself in that in terms of music or art or whatever. Like, so like I don't sit, like if I'm working on visuals, I don't sit there and look at a whole bunch of books about visuals. I just try to give myself to that to the project. Same thing goes with music too. Like when it was time to work on this record, it was okay. This is the only thing that you're listening to. This is the only thing that you're working on, that you're focusing on, sharpening the sort of creative vision that you're trying to make. And that's all I did. So I just immersed myself in it at that point for like a few weeks, a month. That's all I listened to, aside from like a book on tape or podcast or something like that. That wasn't too much of a derailing of that process for me.
Does that help your kind of creative process hone in on what you're looking for out of that project a little bit more doing that?
It keeps you overall focused, because there's so much white noise in the world, and there's so many distractions every day in regular life that, adding entertainment to that just sort of derails it even further, at least for me. I'm sure there's plenty of people that could, take in a whole ton of music and be okay with it. But for me, I want things to be as pure as possible. and I want them to be as much of I want them to be as much of an imprint of my own creation. I don't want it to be a reflection of something else I'm looking at or something like that. And that's the easiest way to do it. Just unplug and do you. Your intent might be to create something like a band like this, for example. Like, I know people call things like super groups and bullshit like that, but we don't. Those aren't things that we create. The only thing is we want to create something that was hyper aggressive, that had more death metal leanings than anything else that we were doing. But we weren't saying like, this is a death metal band, or this is a super group, or this is a whatever. It's just going to be us at the end of the day. We've been making music long enough that we sound like ourselves. We don't dress up to be something. But we have these, the appreciation for these subgenres, and we don't necessarily reflect them in all things, especially, contrasting this band and Weird Wounds or something like that. They're very different. So just trying to keep things as pure as I possibly can. And I think Mike kind of does the same thing.
But yeah, so I was thinking about that notion of, this could be, I could see people calling it a supergroup, which is a complete misnomer, because exactly like you were saying, it's your own thing. It just happens to have people who are in other bands. And I hope people look at it that way, not as a supergroup, because it doesn't really sound like any of your guys' other bands. It doesn't sound like Hatebreed, doesn't sound like Red Chord, doesn't sound like Converge.
No, it doesn't. I think people will always choose a measuring stick. And that's okay. Everyone needs some sort of metric to define something. But it's going to be different from everybody, because we all have different entry points into music, and we have certain things we like and dislike. I can't as a loud vocalist, I've been doing this for a really long time, more than half my life. So, my crazy voice is what it is. I'm not going to do any sort of role playing, I have to work within my limitations. I'm not going to try to do like Glenn Benton or like be a Tardy brother or something like that. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to try to do that. I think it's when I see other artists do that sort of thing, usually it's well intended, but to me it looks like dress up, and that's not something I'm that interested in as an artist. I like things to be as pure as possible, even if they're like hyper dark, like something like this is.
Well, I feel on that note too is, you say your voice only does one thing that it's capable of, but I feel like listening to the songs that you guys have put out already, there's already a nice kind of expanse in your vocal range that I haven't really heard before, especially on the lower register there, which you don't really hear that in Converge.
Not really. And like in the way Mike and I like to work together, like Mike is fantastic at doing a whole bunch of different kind of voices, because it's just the kind of, he actually does voiceover work. So, which is super fun for him. But like coming from the punk world of, I call it punk world, even though it's not, like pure punk, but like the world of music that converges, it's just, it is what it is. It's not meant to be like a specific, like, I'm not meant to be guttural or super crazy or whatever. Like, everybody kind of has their distinct, unapologetic voice in that world, and like, you just kind of do it. I would say that this record is probably a little more straightforward than some Converge records that have a lot of variance in them, because sonically it's like it's all go, where Converge has a little bit more dynamic in it musically. So with that takes up a lot of space within Converge mixes and songwriting. Vocals are never at the forefront, and they're not meant to be. It's like it's very much this like big wash of things. If anything, vocals are probably pushed, at least in contemporary terms, more to the back than they are in anything in Converge mixes. And I'm fine with that. To me, Converge as a drum and guitar band, even though people might relate to, lyrics or some aspects of vocals or bass or something, but that's just kind of what it is. This is a little more traditional in terms of where the vocals kind of sit. So I think you hear a little bit of different kind of tonality that you don't hear in like a loud recording like I've done, like a Converge record or something like that.
So with these past two projects that you've kind of worked on, with the Wear Your Wounds and the Umbra Vitae stuff, how do you are you writing them? You wrote the lyrics for both these, right?
Yeah.
So how do you kind of change your writing style to those bands? You talk about being in the headspace. What do you kind of immerse yourself in for the writing phase for those two bands?
They're not much different. I would say this band is a little darker, but subject matter is always personal. This is a little bit, I would say, a little bit more. I don't want to call it obtuse in writing, because it's pretty on the nose in some places.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really that much different. I think it just has an overall darker tone. Like, I'm not going to sit and write about the fantasy of blood and guts, and I'm not going to write political hardcore songs or whatever. I just kind of write me. I think what ended up coming out in retrospect, when I was typesetting this record and kind of reading through everything again, there's a little bit of a quest, just like, and this is kind of in many things that I work on, but I try to use art as a vehicle and music as a vehicle for self-improvement in some way, and to find some sort of positive. And I think that there's a little bit of a quest to be righteous, if there's such a thing. Yeah, okay. within the lyrical content, where we're all just trying to be better people, and some of that stuff reads a little bit of it as a mantra for that, whereas Converge records tend to get a little bit more introspective, and are a little bit more about sort of dissecting the past and how it reflects in my life now, versus writing about now and today's current events, which I'm kind of doing in this band.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially with the current state of the world, I think having something artistic like that, where you can better yourself, is needed more than ever. Because it's,
for sure, yeah,
it's such a weird time, and so. Did any of this virus situation affect the release of this record, or was it still always going to come out in May?
Well, it affected this record greatly,
okay.
in the sense that there is no physical, aside from test presses, that exist of this record, because plants kind of shuttered themselves, for good reason, obviously, and so we thought about it for a bit, as a label, how we should handle that. Like, should we just put the record on ice? Like, nobody knows about this record or band at the time. We just, because the first announcement of the band existing was also the album announcement. So we could have just kind of put it on the shelf, but we chose to do the opposite. We saw a lot of labels having to do that. For much larger records, you look at like Hatebreed records and Lamb of God records and stuff that exists within that world of heavy music, which I'll just kind of call like the more, I don't want to call it, I'll call it popular heavy music,
Sure.
Something that isn't as, as intense or whatever. That music has, there's a ton invested into the creating of those records, and for all intents and purposes, this is a no frills, metal record with, very, very little in terms of financial investment, like, I mean, yeah, we spent a good amount of money for sure, because you have to, and time and effort. But the way I looked at it and the way the guys here looked at it was like, hey, let's just get it out there. Like, we'll attach apparel to it. We'll sell it and present it in a way that, if somebody buys a shirt, they get, when the record drops, they get the record sent to them if that's what they want, or they'll just buy merch, and then when the record is, actually out and people are, kind of aware of the band and aware of the record existing, at least, the music, then we'll launch pre-orders and stuff and do physical versions when plants come online. Because right now the retail landscape of music is basically completely frozen. Right now retail isn't taking, and mind you, when I say retail, I don't mean like, big box stores or, giant stores where people are running off to buy records, because people aren't doing that. When I say retail, I'm saying even like wholesalers,
Sure.
They're just not even accepting, they're not accepting releases. It's completely frozen. So we have, as a label, we have records that were slated to come out, this month and next month, that we will have physical copies of, but they're not going to actually hit stores until August at the earliest.
Wow.
So because they're freezing shipments, there is no commerce to be had. So, we're fortunate as a business here at Death Wish where, we have we sell direct to most of our customers and our listeners. So people are buying from us directly and supporting us directly. But, I feel for a lot of those labels that don't have that sort of infrastructure to do that sort of thing, that are depending on retail existing, and that are depending on that kind of machine just being in place, and it's just not there right now. So yeah, we chose to, I guess, like, zig when everyone else zagged, and and just said all in. Let's just do the record, this way, because there's no rules. We can do what we want. And with that said, it works. It wouldn't work for all bands, and it wouldn't work for all releases. Like those records I just mentioned, it definitely would not work for those, because I'm sure their budgets are, astronomical in comparison to what they've spent on trying to create a record. Who knows how many physical copies are sitting somewhere in a warehouse of some of those records, that just aren't moving, or plants that half finished things before they shut down. We just chose to do something different. But yeah, there'll be physical copies at some point, and we'll go that direction when we feel comfortable doing that. It's just there's just no reason to right now. I think it would be irresponsible to tie up a lot of this business's money in manufacturing something that has no outlet to be sold.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you guys wanted to release it, especially when there's a lack of pretty much any kind of media going on right now because of everything shut down. Having at least, an album that you can kind of take time out of your day to listen to when nothing else is going on, that's a really good thing to have. You can't go see a movie right now or anything like that. For sure.
Like the landscape is changing, and I think that for a lot of things like movies, for example, they're not going to be able to put that genie back in the bottle. That's going to bankrupt, all of the, or at least a majority of the cinema complexes that exist for that industry. Yeah. That's always been the argument, right? Like they need this financial turnaround for those, huge multi-million-dollar projects to exist. They needed that infrastructure, but they're still doing it now, at least through, utilizing like early access kind of stuff and just putting it on, because otherwise it wouldn't have an audience. Music can do something similar. The issue that I see here is how live music and how physical music is going to react, because over time, as things do reopen, because like it or not, creators of things are going to continue creating things. I mean, I think you saw that, and just in the first few weeks of the initial lockdowns here, right? So like,
oh yeah,
you had everybody. As I was talking to Sean Martin about this actually the other day, it was almost like every creative person was like throwing spaghetti at a wall, trying to hold on to some sort of audience share. They were just kind of like throwing stuff. And there was a lot of incredible ideas in that, but there was also a lot of just sort of like dumping out all of this created content, which I think has like really is really cool in some ways, and then other ways I'm like, well, are you just trying to say, look at me and keep looking at me because you're scared, And I think that there's a lot of that was occurring, that might have been veiled with other sort of like public statements about that sort of stuff. But yeah, like now in like 6 months, right, you're gonna have a variety of artists that have frozen their records, that have maybe they've made new records, since then. And then they're going to want to get those out. And then you're going to have retailers that are already flooded with the stuff that have already been on pause. And then you're going to have live music come back in some capacity, even if it's at like, half venue capacity worldwide. And people are going to want to tour on the records that they froze. And then they're going to want to basically thaw them and go back out, wake them from their cryo sleep. And then you're going to have all of these other people that the train basically just gets longer. It's going to create this a bottleneck of content. And there's only so much. The audience can only take so much in the world of entertainment, right? So like that's a kind of a weird thing where I think a lot of it's like a weird universe that we're all sort of slowly awakening to and starting to acknowledge, like for example, I have booking agents talking to me about tours that were supposed to be announced in for September. They were like September tours, and then you push them into the next year. Well, what does that do to your following year's plans? And what does it do to the things that you're already making, that you might want to be working on and promoting at that point, or playing in front of an audience? Like, what is it? I guess my point is not everything freezes, so everything is kind of moving, and everybody's going to start crawling on top of each other, and it's going to get very messy. So I've been trying to, when people have been asking about like live music with this or with Converge, right now, I just want to say, let's all unplug from that entirely and just not add to that log jam for now, and just do our best to just, survive it.
Yeah, that's something I've been curious about myself is, already seeing these tours get postponed or, put to later dates. And I'm like, well, what's that going to, like, exactly like you said, what's it going to do to everything else? Or even when that time comes around, are these tours really still going to keep going? Like, are these people going to be available? I feel like there's going to be some level of fallout there that people aren't going to be expecting.
And real talk here, like I'm talking initially, I was talking about like, insulated musicians. And by that, I mean like people that are functioning in like the middle class aspect of the world economy. Wherever they are, they're just working musicians. That's like, like whatever, like that's probably like 60% of the musicians I know. The other 40 are ones that do that for sure, that are considered full-time musicians by the public, but they have very real day jobs or multiple day jobs. And their economic situations are changing drastically through this. And how they're able to even manage it, and some of it's completely out of their control. So who's to say that, an incredible musician that you want to see go play songs from their most recent records, even going to be available to make music in 6 months? They might just try to they might be trying to keep the lights on other ways in their life, that music might take a backseat for a couple of years. It might take a backseat forever, because you can't. When people are in these situations where they have to like quite literally change every way that they sort of fit in as a puzzle piece into the economy in which they have to exist in, like they being creative just might not be there anymore. It just might be gone, and like I don't think that's a reality that a lot of people understand, especially when it comes to heavy music. Everybody I know in heavy music multitasks in some capacity. You might think that it's all under the sort of the same wheelhouse, but like I have multiple jobs I do every day. I can do them all from like this place or that place, or majority of them, but that's the way I have to work, because that's the way I have to sort of fit into this world, and everybody else I know is the same way. Yeah, so it's going to definitely be a really interesting time and a challenging time for musicians for sure, and I don't know how it's going to all sort of flesh out.
Yeah, it's really hard for me watching like a lot of people that I knew or worked with in bands, and they're just like, well, hey, we're out of all this money now because we couldn't tour, and watching them try to figure out something to do in the meantime to kind of stay afloat, like you mentioned. And it's like, well, they don't want to go get a day job, but they also can't get a day job right now because everything's
There's no
on
job,
lockdown.
right? There's no job. I totally feel for those people. Yeah, it's a tough place, like I don't want to, like, personally, I could sit here and count the sort of income I've lost for 2020 because of canceled tours, but it doesn't do me any sort of service to do that. I just need to sort of figure out ways to stay productive, to be productive and responsible to the artists that trust me to do that, for under the Death Wish moniker. My band that essentially, it is self-managed, which is, entrusts me to figure out ways to, keep things moving on that end. It's a lot, but I think that when you start sitting there and counting how much you lost, you're already losing more. You just gotta change course and figure out what you can do. That's why a lot of people were throwing spaghetti at the wall, as I said. And I don't blame them for it. But, to me, that was that kind of sense of panic isn't necessarily calculated, and that kind of mess might not be a good thing at the end, just might be too much shit out there without editing and refining and making it the best version that it can be.
Yeah, is that something that you kind of focus on personally with all your projects? Because it seems like there's, and I don't mean this as a slight to any other bands or any musicians, but it seems like everything that you do or work on, it's never half-assed. It's like you have put all your time and effort into this, into making sure that it's perfect, and here it is. And you it's consistency with you, and that's what I appreciate about you and your band and everything that you work on in your art, is the consistency and everything. Is that something that you focus on personally with your projects?
Well, for sure, thank you for that and acknowledging that, because that's something that's super important to me, and it's just for me, it's sort of like the reason for doing it, right? Is like, it's an outlet for sure, but I always want whatever I am currently working on or releasing to be the best version of whatever it may be, and if I was just rehashing the same thing over and over again, I feel like I would be a conflicted artist. At that point, I would just kind of be maintaining something, and I look at this whole process of being a creative person as I guess as a process and constant refinement and progression. You should always be doing your best work. You should never be doing 80% of your 100%. You should just do your 100%. And there, of course, there's going to be a level of compromise. There always is some sort of level of compromise somewhere. It's going to be there regardless. You can't you can't again whittle the wood forever. You just have to set things free. But then you have to learn how to be comfortable with that process and allowing things to just sort of go and be free. And I think once you get to that point as a creative person, and you don't have to do it forever, you can do it for 2 months and just sort of get to that mentality, then you start making cohesively solid work, regardless of if it connects with, the world or not. As long as you feel that you're making good stuff, at that point. But yeah, it is super important to me, and it's super important to a lot of artists out there that I am a fan of. So it's a good mindset to have. It's never let me down.
Yeah. This is I don't want to keep you too much longer, but this is one last thing that I kind of want to get into here is your actual artwork, like your paintings and digital art and everything that you do. I was wondering if we could kind of, not necessarily dissect, but I kind of want to figure out the ways you kind of do certain things with some pieces that you've done over the years, if you
Sure.
maybe can recall.
Yeah, I can try.
So the few that have really like impacted me when I saw them, and the ones that I wouldn't say they're my favorites, but they're ones that I like a whole lot, are when you kind of do like movie stuff. A few years back, you did the Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's Monster.
Right. Yeah.
And you did the Alien piece recently, the Giger Alien, and the album art album art for the EP. I Can Tell You About Pain.
Yep.
All of those images are so visually striking to me, in terms of color palette, and that's the one thing I'm curious how you kind of experiment with color wise, like.
Sure.
Especially with the Giger stuff, you have those different colorways like the red and gold, blue and silver. How do you experiment getting those different things in the pieces like that?
Well, I guess I can go to those first, because I have how many paintings in front of me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 8 different process sort of paintings that I started for that.
Wow.
Here, and they're all like they're intentionally built sort of as like physical layers. So say like I wanted to create the silhouette of the xenomorph, right? So I started playing with that idea, and my xenomorph is sort of like a hybrid amalgamation of a bunch of xenomorphs, because there's a bunch of xenomorphs, right? So if you were like a super aficionado of that world, it wouldn't really be, it wouldn't be like, the xenomorph A, B, or C. It's sort of like a mix of a bunch of them. And it's just
That's
like
cool.
it's the strongest elements of what I like about them. People are like, oh, it's like super phallic. It looks like a penis. It's like, oh, all the Geiger stuff does. That's the point.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
I'm not going to like black that out, like that's sort of that's the whole thing. But yeah, so I did, 8 different little background process paintings for that, all in sort of different levels of chaos. And then I started working on different details of it. I started building those details initially I think I cut and pasted a bunch of, it's right here. I cut and pasted a bunch of different sort of machine parts and organic parts on top of the basic shape, and then I started basically remaking the teeth of one of the original xenomorphs out of those shapes. And you go in there and you leave a sort of a happy accident, a fragment of this, a fragment of that. Assemble all those layers and in the way that you hopefully intended, and see what happens. That process is really simple on like early records, like Converge records, like the Jane record, for example.
Yeah.
Where it's broken down basically into like a light, dark, and black, and there's different levels of painting and Xerox work and cut and paste collage work that you kind of build into these sort of hybrid things. And as I've gotten more experience at it over the years, because I've been doing it forever, it's basically, like cut and paste collage mixed with, like a mixed media where there are no accidents. There's no right way of doing something. You just keep trying to make something unique and have the energy that you intended out of all those medias. You kind of smash them all together, and that's what you get. In terms of color palette, early stuff started off super simple, like really limited color palettes, and I liked doing that. I mean, I still like doing that because you have the sense of control, and you can kind of control what you're working with, but like I also went to art school and took color theory, and know how things will work together.
Absolutely.
And then I started kind of playing with those ideas, and in the last 5 or 10 years, I've gotten, I'll say, more brave with color, where I just kind of got bored doing kind of muted colors and started going like hyper violet with stuff, and just making things have a different kind of energy that I didn't really see out there that I wanted to see in art. Like the Bride of Frankenstein's a good example of that. Like I think I worked on just the streak in the bride's hair for probably 2 weeks, and I probably made 100 streaks or more, to get it right. And you never knew exactly what was going to happen until it dried, and then I would sort of see if it was going to work well within the piece. If I didn't like it, I'd wipe it down. I'd start again. I would just kind of keep working on it and keep working on it. So sometimes stuff happens super fast and you can finish a project really quickly. And other times, you could be chopping at these ideas for a long time. I also should mention too, with a lot of this stuff, like I'm always working in my mind. I'm not a crazy person. My wife would say I'm a crazy person, but my mind is always moving. And so when I go to bed at night, before I fall asleep, I'm thinking about the visual projects I'm working on, or how I'd like to assemble this or that, or things I haven't tried, and trying to like work out and solve visual problems in my head as I do that. And I do the same thing with music and lyrical content and writing and stuff like that. So that's what's entertainment to me. Like I'm entertaining, like for me, that's fun.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes me a bit of a drag to be around, to be honest, because I'm always working. My mind doesn't really turn off and give in to something very easily. I'm pretty resistant to that, like me on vacations, like probably a complete nightmare, because I can't unplug like that. It doesn't mean I'm not in the moment, but I like to, I find a lot of fulfillment in that creative process. To me, it's part of, it definitely is a job in some ways, but it also brings me a lot of pleasure too. So, I'm always working out those ideas, and sometimes some of those ideas that I come up with, when I'm not sitting in front of like a piece or how to approach, a visual problem, a lot of times they get solved in that process. That's why I can't turn it off. I think like if you listen to anybody that's a writer discuss their process, somebody will just jump up and go write something down at 4:00 in the morning because it popped in their head, or they keep like a journal next to them, because sometimes ideas come at the strangest times. And I think if you are a creative person, you have to sort of give yourself to whatever part of that process works for you, and that's what works for me. So I went off on a tangent on process, but
no,
process
perfect.
is super important to me, though. It never ends. You're always working towards something. I know
not to wax your car too much here, but the reason I kind of wanted to delve into your art is because you are one of my favorite visual artists. I have like 3 or 4 of your prints, hanging up in my room that I've collected over the years, and there's something so striking to me about your imagery that when I see it, I'm like, it connects with me for whatever reason, and it's just an image,
Well, yeah, it's just an image, but I appreciate that, because I'm working through a variety of emotions and sort of problem solving, and probably putting a whole lot of me that I don't even know is me into my artwork, because I don't go back and look at my stuff all that much. I'm not that kind of reflective person, but because as I said, I kind of like to move forward, but I can recollect, certain aspects of, creating things like quite well, like the Bride of Frankenstein stuff. I remember creating like silhouette paintings for that for weeks, because I just wanted something I wanted something to appear that didn't appear yet. And I was working so hard on such subtle little things that people probably don't even notice, but I notice. And those things are that's sort of like going through that process allows me to finally be done with something, and so like I might have something that's 98% done in that in that sort of state for, I don't know, months, weeks, whatever, and then I just sort of let go of it and go, okay, it's free, but I have to kind of sit there with it and work with those things. That is super hard for me when it comes to personal work. Design work's a little different. Design work, I know something's successful because I have a design background. I went to school for design, so I know what good design is. And so when I create it and it solves a bunch of problems, I go, okay, hey, this is great. Here it is. The character's done. Everything's done. But when it's me creating the actual art, there's a different level of sort of emotional connection to it, or psychological connection to it. I don't want to say emotional connection, more of a psychological connection and process to it. So being okay with setting it free takes a while sometimes. Even though you might make the actual piece or make the actual art in just like a couple hours sometimes too. It might still sit around for weeks. It just is what it is. There's no right or wrong way.
Yeah, that's very true. And man, that's incredible to hear. That's something I was like, every time I look at your stuff, I'm like, man, I just wonder how he does it. Because you've done a few videos on like back when you did the Jane project, kind of how you were making stuff. But I was like, wanting to get in your head a little more with like how you were working on things there.
For sure. And, like I've thought about doing that and, showing, like, because I show people process stuff all the time, and I think there's one generational thing that I think a lot of people don't really connect with is that, these things are tangible things. Like I make a million pieces. There's always piles of sort of, of process of a project all over the place, then you can digitally clean stuff up and make things, 100% after the fact. But like, you got to go through that process, like, or at least I do, so when someone says, oh, like, how do you get that, I don't know, like that brush stroke to go into this and do that, it's like, that's like, it's real. It's, it's because it's real.
Yeah, that's the thing that blows my mind about it. It's like everybody only sees the digital side of it, but I, kind of knowing about you and what you do, I'm like, well, that's all the real thing that exists somewhere.
And it's a lot of it is happy accidents, like you just have to keep making stuff. Like, one of the hardest things for me in the, let's just call it the sort of quarantine lockdown time, which we're existing in right now, is I always struggle with this anyway, is having enough time to do that visual work and work out those processes. Like I have lots of unfinished things here that I want to work on, but I'm packing orders and getting records out the door with everybody else here, like, because there's no staff to do it because I can't have anybody here.
Oh man.
So like, and it's not that's not like a, like, woe is me, sorry, like feel sorry for me. Like I don't give a shit. I'm just glad that I have a business that can, survive certain aspects of this for sure. But like, as a creative person, I've been on ice for a while, I feel fortunate that I made a whole lot of stuff before all of this happened. And like this record we're talking about is, one of those things. We made a full album and, we can give it to the world right now. But like, and I have other music and stuff that is going to come out this year that's done too, and nice. So I feel fortunate that I did all that, because right now, like I'm working in the warehouse just as much as I'm working in my little spot in here.
I mean, it's good you're still working and you're getting these things out because, like you said, you could just sit on them and then, what's going to become of it after that. So it's good that you're actually willing to put the stuff out that is done.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's going to keep it going, like the world doesn't freeze all at the same rate, and so, and for me, I think that, getting these things out there allows me to get to the next thing, and that's a good thing. So I'm just kind of doing what I can.
All right, so this should be really quick. Every time I've seen you guys in concert, I've come up to talk to you about MMA because I know you're a big MMA fan.
Sure.
Obviously, with the cancellation of Khabib and Tony, who do you think would have won that fight?
Ooh. More than likely, it depends. There's a lot of factors in fighting, right?
Yeah,
and there's a lot of psychological factors in fighting. If that fight happened in an empty arena with all of the travel restrictions and all the chaos that was occurring leading up to that potential Fight Island version of that fight, or doing it at Tachi Palace or something like that, I think Tony would have won. In that he was more local. I think that his psychological, at least what I see of a fighter, and I think fighters are some of the most pure people, not necessarily what they put out there to the public, but when you can analyze a lot of what somebody is when you see them fight. Because fighting has so much honesty in it. That's why it's the only sport I care about.
Same here.
So with that said, I think Tony would have been as wild and sort of unhinged as Tony is, and I think he would have taken full advantage of the situation, and he probably would have caught Khabib somehow if the fight occurred. If it happens without any of the current state of affairs happening in the world, I think Khabib would have won.
Okay.
And that's because his game is about meticulous control and domination, and you have to have an unrattled sort of mindset to be able to implement that sort of game plan. And if you're bouncing around the world trying to keep the fight going and leaving your Northern California camp and then going to Kazakhstan so you can be able to fly to the UAE if the fight was going to happen there, and you're a religious person and you have Ramadan around the corner and you're just under a ton of pressure to ensure that you deliver before that deadline.
It's a lot. It's a lot to take into account.
Yeah, it's a lot to take into account, and I think that would have changed the game entirely. But yeah, it's a wild time for all combat sports. It's more of a wild time for team sports, really.
Yeah.
I was reading some MMA, some MMA news stuff last night, and they were talking about. They were just talking about how the draft was. Did the NFL draft just occur yesterday or the last couple of days or something like that? They were talking.
I think so. Yeah.
Something like that, and they were just talking about that process. And I'm like, wow, that's great because there's billions of dollars on the line for that business in terms in that sports and all those franchises, but they're all operating under the this sort of idea that everything's going to happen.
Yeah.
And they have to. And it's like this really wild time for all of us to think about that sort of thing. But really, they have no idea what it's going to look like. They have no idea.
Yeah, it's weird, man. Nothing's going to pan out like we think it is, I feel like.
I think we're going to all be okay. I think it's just going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
To sort of right itself, and it's not going to be the same once it rights itself. In terms of combat sports, who do you have, Khabib or Tony, in that fight?
Honestly, I was leaning a little bit more towards Tony just because he has a lot of pressure standing up, and I know I've seen Khabib get dropped by Michael Johnson before, so
sure.
I'm kind of wondering, how well does his chin? And I mean, even Connor hit him with some solid shots that rocked him. So
he did, but Michael Johnson is an actual dark horse. People sleep on Michael Johnson all the time because he never. Not. Yeah, because he's people consider him a C-level fighter, and he's not.
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is the 155ers have like it's almost all A games, at least in the UFC.
Yeah, it's insane.
And that's super scary, like that's what's so fun about the division. You could take anybody versus anybody, and it's a fascinating fight. I've been a fan of Justin Gaethje since he fought Dan Lazon, who I casually know, who I haven't seen in years, but he fought him in the beginning of what was called World Series of Fighting.
Uh-huh.
And he basically destroyed Dan, and beat him soundly. And it's one of those things where I talked to another friend of mine that is a huge fan of fighting and is a jiu-jitsu guy and stuff. And we kind of have this shared mindset where like if somebody beats somebody that we care about, we almost have to become a fan of them because they kind of steal part of their soul. It's like they kind of collect them.
Yeah.
And especially at that era of Justin fighting, when we saw him fight, Dan was like this. He's just unstoppable violence. Go for broke violence. Well, I'd say he's not unstoppable. He's stoppable. But the level in which he pressures and puts out inputs on people is something unlike anything else that's out there right now. It's sort of like a throwback to the golden era of MMA, which I sort of like. It gives there's like a level of fear that he instills in people, sort of like old Vanderlei has that kind of mentality, where he's not necessarily going to win, but he's going to hurt you. And that's a pretty intimidating thing, especially when you're dealing with all of these killers, that he can still do that to other killers.
Yeah, that old style of swing and bang, as I like to call it, is definitely one of those things that, if a fighter comes along that starts doing that, I'm like, you know what, I'm a fan, because that's what I grew up watching, was those kind of fighters and guys.
Well, and it's also the pressure.
Not that there's anything wrong with the way the game's changed.
Well, the game's changed in a way that you can read it better, but like people don't understand that. Fighters do, and I would say like people that you're a fan. Obviously, I'm a fan. Yeah. Like there's so much skill in dirty boxing. I saw a great breakdown the other day. They were talking about like old Vanderlei. I think it was on like MMA TV, and like one of the first comments I saw was somebody said, like, look at that nasty triple hook, and it's true. Like it was all this inside clinch fighting stuff and all this pressure fighting that looked like a melee, but it wasn't a melee. I think when people see that stuff and they think that it's unskilled, it's like they have no idea what you can do in like a pressure situation in the clinch and how much damage you can do to somebody. And some people are masters of that sort of thing. Yeah. It's not pretty. So it just looks like a mauling, but it's not a mauling. It's calculated. Especially when somebody is training for that sort of thing day in and day out, like the old shoot box guys and stuff. But in terms of Justin, his leg kicks are nasty. His pressure game is nasty. His wrestling's fantastic, and nobody really has to see it because they don't have to deal with it. I think Justin and Khabib would be the fight. And I think that you would see, I think you would see Khabib put to sleep in that fight.
Interesting. Yeah.
Just because of the power, and that he has. And I think that he would be able to deal with, I don't think he'd be able to deal with Khabib in terms of like taking him down, but he wouldn't be totally nullified. Where I think Tony would be nullified and would be fighting off his back for much of that fight and would probably lose a decision. And he would do damage too. I think he would cut him up Tony would cut him up from below and give people a lot of hope that something else would happen. But
and Tony's jiu-jitsu is pretty darn good.
It's pretty darn good, but when you're dealing, Khabib is not going to give him any space.
Yeah.
And jiu-jitsu needs space, and you have to make space. You have to make angles you have to make space to make angles to make things work. And if you're just dealing with a complete like top pressure game like Khabib, it wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't, because that's all he's training for. You think about it. He's not gonna. he's not going to worry about Tony standing with him. He's going to,
Nope.
you know, that's a non-issue. Justin, on the other hand, I think gives him a whole lot of problems because he won't fear him.
Yeah, there's so many interesting fights that could come out of this when it's all said and done. And it's on one hand, like, it's kind of nice to have a break from all these fights because having one every weekend was getting a little too much for me.
Well, you know what's going to happen? We're going to have all of the fights, come in a couple months, starting in May, because they have to keep in order to get their, I think it's like $80 million of bonus on the line, or as close to that. They have to fulfill their ESPN contract, so they're going to be stacking fights on top of each other. You might see 2 a weekend, but they have to deliver, like, I forgot what the number is, but it's a significant amount. It's intense. And that's really what that's about. That's what Fight Island is about. That's what, fighting in their center that they built. That's why, there was so much pressure to get that Khabib fight and with Tony on.
Yep.
That's what that was about. That wasn't about, like, entertaining people that were in quarantine, and that's fine. It's not dirty. It is what it is. That's why the NFL draft is happening, like we were talking about. People are there's money on the line with these people.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's a weird time, man. Who knows how this stuff's gonna recover? But
let me ask you one quick MMA question. So.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go a little bit. We'll go a little bit longer because I don't get to talk to people about MMA I actually don't.
Okay, I honestly thought we were on a time limit, man. So I was just trying to not keep you. So whatever.
We're on a time limit, but that's okay. I got like a half hour for the next one.
All right, man. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so that was one. We talked about 155. All A-level killers. What do you think? Let's go up before we go down, because down kind of starts getting messy after 145. Yep. What do you think about 170 right now?
170. That's Adesanya?
Yeah.
Or no, Usman.
No, sorry, that's he's 185. Right now, you have Usman at 170.
Yeah, that's right. Okay,
and,
so
Tyrone is trying to keep the spotlight on him to try to get a fight. You have Leon Edwards. Yep. You have who else do you have? I'm blanking on people.
170 is a weird.
It's a mess.
Right now.
Well, I guess what I was getting at was I think it's fascinating from a fan standpoint to see how 170 and during like the sort of Matt Hughes GSP era was the division.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now it's not that there aren't killers there. It's just that it's become so off of the spotlight. It's kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, that one's been a revolving door for the past few years now, and seems like
basically since
GSP...
since Johnny Hendricks was champ, that was kind of it. After that it kind of got weird. It got real weird. But yeah, Robbie Lawler gave it a little bit of excitement. But yeah, I mean, like I think Connor's made a mess of all of that. I think Nate Diaz has made a mess of all of that.
Unfortunately, he has. Even though it was cool that he got up there.
I think it's fascinating. I think he's incredible, and I think his boxing is completely underrated. He's also a huge man. I don't think people understand how big he is for any of the divisions he's in. And people look at him and they go, "Well, look, he was smaller than Nate." Well, people don't realize how big Nate is. Nate's a huge person. Person. They what did you think of Ben Askren washing out of the division and eventually retiring? Was that surprising to you?
No, not surprising at all. I've never been a Ben Askren fan, not just because of his personality outside the ring, but just like watching him fight. It was always so boring. One of the worst fights I've ever seen was him and Jake Shields.
Yeah.
And I was just like, how can people want this guy in the UFC? I don't get it. And
Jake Shields to me was the jiu-jitsu version of Ben, where like Jake was fascinating and unbeatable for so many people, but yeah, just not fun to watch from just like a general standpoint. Like, I think To me, the most interesting guy in welterweight world is probably Douglas Lima, who's I think outside of he's outside of UFC right now.
Yeah, he's in Bellator, right?
Yeah, he's already at the sort of top of his career. If anything, I think he's sort of coming down. He's going down the athletic hill right now. I don't think he's not washed up at all. But I just think he's been fighting for so long that he has a lot of mileage on him. But he's a monster. I think he's probably right there in terms of. I wish he was in the UFC fighting.
Yeah,
it would be good.
Yeah, there's a couple guys in Bellator that I wish were in the UFC that I think could do some serious damage in there.
RDA at 170 I like too, and sometimes I'm kind of a little bit befuddled why he doesn't do as well as he has in the past.
I think it's this is just my theory. It's never been obviously proven, but I think it's the USADA stuff. I think he was on a little bit of juice there for a while, and it's kind of affected his performance.
I think they were all. I think everybody's been on the juice that's been professionally fighting for a long time, and and I think all athletes in some way are enhanced. Where do you draw the line? When somebody has multi-million-dollar incredible nutrition and fitness regimens. I mean, that's true. and that's what's the difference? Like the playing field's never level, and it's never level physically either.
Yeah.
I don't know. My personal favorite of that world of fighters was Eddie Alvarez, and still is. Just because he has done his own thing forever. And I find him to be a fascinating individual and an incredible fighter, and an incredibly intelligent fighter when he's in there. But yeah, he's always super interesting to me too at 155. Okay. Oh, you know why 170 is kind of a nightmare? It's also because of Colby as well.
Oh man, I know. I hate that guy so much.
I would appreciate any sort of shtick that keeps somebody's sort of character up there, because they have to entertain to some capacity. But it's just poisonous stuff. I'm just not into it.
Yeah, and it's like on one hand, in some respects he is playing up to it, but he's playing up just a little too much to where it's just like it's not what I want to be a part of or support.
Here, I'll put you on again. What do you think the UFC should do with Jon Jones right now?
Man, so here's the thing. I've given him so many chances, like with all his shit. Like I get it. He was so young when he won that title, and being 23, having all this money, all this popularity, being in the limelight. Yeah, you're gonna party a lot. It's the same thing when Robert Downey Jr. gets a lot of shit for all his drinking and drugs, but he was young. He had a ton of money. That's just what happens. The way I look at it.
BJ was a kid too.
BJ, yeah, another good example. But now he's like my age. He's he's in his mid 30s and he has kids and a girlfriend, and I don't know, man. I think he should be stripped for good, to be honest. It's just, how much are you gonna let this guy go before he does hurt somebody with his recklessness? Like he already kind of did. He hit that pregnant lady, and
that was he's been on a wild roller coaster. Incredible athlete. Incredible fighter, incredible fight IQ. I think
that's what kills me, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was pulling for Anthony Smith when Anthony Smith fought him, because I find Anthony Smith to be so likable. And I thought Thiago Santos actually had the best fight against him.
I agree. He definitely brought it to him.
He did, and with two blown knees, I think, which is like totally crazy to think about. I think that if he fights, is Costa up there to fight him?
Costa is.
Or is he 185?
Yeah.
I think Costa, if he moved up, would be very scary, because I think someone that's going to just put power on John and just pressure fight him that way is going to do something. Nobody can wrestle with him. He's going to be, he's either going to step down when he feels like stepping down, or it's going to be like a crazy blitz, like someone like Costa or something like that. I don't think I'm trying to think of anybody that's at 205 that could do that right now, and nobody can.
Yeah, there's not really anybody. Like, everybody thought Johnny Walker was going to be his biggest contender, and now he's lost like 2 in a row. And
He's too wild.
yeah,
I think I think he will be something. He obviously is something as a person, is something in terms of a title contender eventually if he stays with. I'm trying to remember what camp he went to. I think he
went to TriStar.
in TriStar. Yeah, so TriStar is basically going to rebuild him and build him up again. I think that's where you're going to see there. And if he can take to that instruction, that could be interesting.
I feel like if he went there, he knew what he was getting into, so he's got to like be wanting, more from himself and from that camp. So probably a good decision
for sure. And we'll keep moving up. So we skipped middleweight, so let's move down. So middleweight, what do you think about middleweights right now?
So 185.
Yeah.
Man, I was so disappointed with Adesanya and Romero. Like that was such a bad fight.
That was exactly what I thought it would happen, though. To be honest.
Yeah, he's too scared. He's too scared to get hit by the power puncher, and I don't understand why Romero didn't wrestle though. Like that could have been his victory if he would have just wrestled.
I think because he's old and he's hurt. I think that the mileage that he has in his body, even though he's, like a terrifying brick shit house with all the skill in the world, I don't think he doesn't want to move unless he has to. And if you see his wins, like his explosive wins, like against like Wyman, for example, like the flying knee sort of stuff like that, it's out of these high pressure moments that it's sort of like he just kind of goes for it because it's just right there, like it's in a scramble. He's not an offensive fighter. He's just not. I thought that the fascinating feud he had with Tim Kennedy, like early on, it's like 5 or 6 years ago. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, that to me that was like the ultimate foe for Romero at the time. It's too bad it just kind of didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, that is one thing about Romero that I keep in the back of my mind a lot. Is I either heard it on a podcast or read about it or something, but like his neck is fused together, and if he gets hit hard enough, he could die or something like that.
I haven't heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised of any sort of, like intense injuries that he could be carrying around like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's super scary. He's like a super scary person.
I know.
Robert Whittaker, I'm curious what he's going to look like when he comes back.
That was surprising, man. I was all aboard the Whittaker train. I was like, yeah, this guy's gonna destroy most of the 185ers, and then
I like him. I like him. I think he's a little bit he's a little wild sometimes, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Which I like as a fan. But if I was not like I'm skilled for it, but if I was a coach, I would like, sometimes it must be really frustrating for his corner. But yeah, I don't know how that's going to work out. But I actually used to really like Luke Rockhold before he got super hurt. I think he had a issue with his shin for like a year or two, and basically he had like an abscess in his shin, and he used to basically wrap it up. But he had that open wound that was like equivalent of like a staph infection or something like that.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
And I think that kind of took him out of the game. Weidman I think fighting at 205 was a mistake. I think he should stay at middleweight and finish out his career there. But hey, all right. Well, I'll stop there because I could go on forever. With,
hey, it's all good, man. I appreciate you taking the time and chatting about it.
Yeah, no problem.
So where can everybody pick up the record when it comes out? I guess that's the most important thing here.
So the new record comes out, Shadow of Life, which essentially is the band's name. Comes out May 1st, and it'll be on all digital services that day. Cool. We're not releasing any more music until then because it's just around the corner.
Yep.
We're almost there. I really want to just thank everybody that's taken the time to listen to it so far. The feedback has been beyond overwhelming for all of us. People have been really receptive to it and connecting with it in all the ways that we hoped people would connect with it. So that's been absolutely fantastic. So all digital services, which means Apple and Spotify and YouTube and Tidal and Bandcamp and all that stuff. So how people are basically ingesting music these days, it'll all be there, and then we'll have physical records sometime this year. Again, we have test presses. We're sitting on it. We just need to put in an order. But we'll start doing that stuff, when it feels responsible to do that. And, hopefully when live music comes back, we will start doing some touring. This isn't a project. This one is a real band.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
So
I would love to see this stuff live.
Yeah, like we really want to give this band the attention. We all have other things that we do, but I think that we all really just want to be able to play heavy music live. And I know, like Mike and I talk about it all the time, that we just wish we had more opportunity to do that. And it's not that our other bands don't get that opportunity. It's just getting all the planets to align. There's
yeah,
it's tough. And so if we can kind of fill that aspect of that desire within our lives and do it with this band, then that's a good thing. So that's what it's here for.
Cool, man. Well, seriously, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for dealing with my tangents and my MMA talk. And hopefully you'll dig it.
Be excellent to each other and